The United States government being so willing to garnish the wages of over 5 million Americans for student loan debt because the courts refused to allow Biden's SAVE Act or even student loan forgiveness, because doing so would sacrifice the economic prosperity of corporations, so the student loan companies. That is wild, because that's telling us that the means to the end to our government isn't success of individuals but success of corporations. And obviously they're doing that legally because of Citizens United, corporate personhood, right? But at that forefront, I need you to understand that at every single corner of every issue that is our problem, it is corporate personhood. It is Citizens United, because it is dark money. It is the fact that our politicians across the party divide exist as corporate lobbyists, not as public officials. And that's on both parties. DT serves Russia, but Joe Biden served Israel. What about America? What about Americans? They don't, because they don't want to question tradition. They don't want to question why is it that we allowed for Citizens United to build on top of corporate personhood, which in fact isn't built on legal argument but a legal footnote. See, our problem is that our government has not served under its design of the Constitution to be a body of change and prosperity for individuals, but in fact we've allowed for it to carry on external foreign entities and actually hold their interests above our own. In our reality, here we are. And what does that mean? Because all branches have been complicit in upholding this type of political reality. So this means we need a change. And when we need a change, we need a structural change. We need a constitutional change. And I spoke about how I don't trust doing that right now. However, the center of every single struggle that we have is dark money. It is Citizens United. And that is a focus that we have to really consider, the fact that corporations are not just bending a knee, they are willingly dropping things that they thought were baggage. So they weren't going for DEI because they actually found value in it. They found it as a trend. Target banning it before they even were forced to. These are companies who don't care about the country in which they are existing in. They only care about their profit. They don't care about impact. They don't care if the president allows for children, 5-year-old, to start working, because then they have employees they can pay less. So what we have to consider is that corporations and companies are taking advantage of the American individual because they perceive that we are not worth investing in, and that's because our government perceives that we are not worth investing in because they only invest in the corporations. That is why my governor, Gavin Newsom, believes that criticizing the lack of due process when they unconstitutionally kidnapped Abrego Garcia and sent him to El Salvador is a distraction to the economic harm, when any student of history knows that economic harm is used to desensitize people from criticizing social harm, because you don't care about people being kidnapped and sent unconstitutionally to El Salvador, or even sent hundreds of miles away to Louisiana, because it's not tariffs. History rhymes, because in every single reality where an authoritarian went into fruition, it was because no one wanted to challenge it, because they wanted the economic prosperity of pretending like it was valid. And the United States, our problem is the fact that we have a president who is ignoring the Constitution, and you ask yourself, why is he ignoring the Constitution? Because you are ignoring the Constitution when you consider him legitimate. Democrats are breaking the Constitution when they consider him legitimate. Amendment 14, Section 3 is not optional, and the fact that a Chief Justice considered it to be non-self-executing because his own feelings said so doesn't mean that that is what we should keep, because the Constitution is the law of the land, not a fucking judge. That judge can interpret it. However, if the Constitution literally says the sky is blue, then the sky is blue. A judge cannot say, well, I mean, sometimes it's not blue, so I'm going to say otherwise. You need an amendment to change it like that, and we don't have that. Which means that why is he breaking the Constitution? Because him being in the White House is breaking the Constitution. How do you expect him to not break the Constitution when we need to break the Constitution in order to keep him? Any other country keeping an illegitimate government would be sanctioned. But look at us. What we're doing is just gaslighting the people into thinking that because the courts have not ruled on anything, because the Congress won't do anything when it comes to Amendment 14, Section 3, it means he's valid. But he's not. And we're going to exist in that, and we're going to continue in that until we truly, truly figure out the legitimacy of this candidate who literally, under the Jack Smith report, created actions to unconstitutionally change the 2020 presidential election. through what? The 2021 insurrection. If he is a legitimate president, then the Constitution is optional. Because this is the problem, that corporations think the Constitution is optional, and so do politicians, and that's why they consider him legitimate. Literally nowhere in the Constitution does it say that corporations are people, but courts are allowed to just create people out of thin air, just like they created a fetus being a person prior to viability, even though science has not proven that. We give courts way too much power, and Federal 78 says that the courts are the weakest branch of government. Yet look at us here, only being forced into being in a reality where we have a candidate who literally attacked the Constitution because the courts failed to safeguard that, right? So the constitutional crisis wouldn't be true without the courts failing, without the legislative failing, and without the executive failing, because Joe Biden was a president who allowed for the DOJ to drop that election interference case. So it was the fault of multiple people, and most especially the president, who refused to even challenge it. Why? Because he refused to go against tradition, but tradition isn't aligned to the law. So he didn't see it as worth it to safeguard this country. And that is what we have to acknowledge, that democratic centrist status quo is why we're here. We need to reform our party. We need to reform our country.